This is not going to be some reactionary video where I'm spilling hate on the people who developed this modern design thinking framework in Silicon Valley. I hate this trend, if you want to call it that, where people try to misconstrue other people's arguments and grab a small clip and cut it out of context, and so that they can win, and also making the most effort to not understand where the other person's coming from. Even if you have a different opinion, there's stuff that you might learn there that you didn't previously know. So this is not going to be some hate-filled reactionary video towards the people who developed this framework, because like I said, I don't want this to be sort of a negative spewing, hate-filled reactionary video. But having said that, I do have some strong criticisms, and just like that point that I just mentioned, I think is important. I think that also criticizing ideas that you don't agree with is critical for our society in general, and a way for you to conduct your life, without essentially being fed all the stuff that everyone else thinks, and actually having an opinion of your own. There's also not going to be some claim to 5 minutes of fame by having a contrary opinion. I actually have laid this out well, in my opinion, to the best of my abilities at least. And so I want to show you this, and then you make up your own mind about what you think about this. So having said that, let's get right into it. I'm going to make another video, and I'm going to attach it here on a link below, where I go into why perception is so important to be corrected, because the first thing that adults don't have is not another framework that was made up by engineers to sort of follow more production processes or make them more efficient or anything like that, but actually something that's even more critical, that if you take a look at the average adult, how they draw, this perception is totally and completely skewed. It's not representing reality accurately at all, and it has nothing to do with fine motor skills. It has actually to do with the fact that you draw with your eyes, you don't draw with your hand, and that before even thinking about doing any kind of design thinking, you actually need to correct these errors in perception first. How? By drawing, and that can be by technical drawing, by any kind of method that rearranges your perception to really accurately portray what's going on. And then that ability, in my opinion, bleeds out into your logical side and brings those skills, much like this is one of my favorite examples. When you take, for example, a dentist and an architect into a party, let's say this is a beautiful house, and the dentist is probably going to mingle around with the people in the party, and he's probably going to look at people's mouths more than the architect would. Why? Because he spends 8 hours a day doing this. And that same party, the architect is probably going to look at the architecture more than he will at people's teeth, because that's not his area of expertise. So there's this sort of implicit bias from our profession that we have lying around, and there's also like secondary skills. These are like adjacent skills. Say, for example, you're a musician. You don't just learn how to play an instrument. Your concentration gets better. Your memorization gets better. You start to listen to people in a different way and in a different level than, I would say, people who don't train their eyes as much would. And so all these adjacent skills, I think, are what come with drawing. And that's what I consider real design thinking, because you gained the skill of drawing. And by the way, if you want to take a look at the root word, diseño, all right, it needs to start with a visual cue. The thing about design is that you really need to understand the visuals first, okay? And so let's take a look at this picture. So this is one of the most clear-cut differences that I really see between the principles that people in Silicon Valley want to espouse And again, Silicon Valley has had all this influence, not just in the material world, but also in the intellectual world, if you want to call it somewhat, the framework world, where you want to sort of influence how people think. This stuff is taught all over academia, all over the biggest institutions that you might think, the Ivy Leagues, all the corporations teach this, and I think it's just completely wrong. And you can have a different opinion. That's just what I think. Why? Let's just start by understanding that there's a deeper framework on your eyes, that visual language is not just something that looks pretty or that is fun to do. No, there's actually a prior understanding to our current understanding of knowledge, which was visual. We evolved through millions and millions of years to actually understand patterns in nature. All the animals in the world have eyes. They all used it to calibrate their environment, to assess threats. All these understandings of the world actually came from our visual system first, and then we developed speech and logic and all these other areas that are great, but actually our visual system has way more influence in how we understand the world than any of the words that we use, than any of the engineering things that we can do. Even think about what links the engineer that does a bridge with the designer that does a shirt or a logo. There's a small process of ideation right before you do. They're very different fields, completely different fields. But there's a small process of ideation where you're sketching. You're giving yourself an idea of how it's going to be. You see coaches doing this. You see engineers doing this. Everyone does this. Mathematicians do this because it's easier to represent something by way of creating a small abstraction than it is to having 1,000 words trying to explain the thing. It's not just that you're going to get it easier, it's a different kind of understanding than if you try to explain things and if you try to build worded frameworks around these things. There's also a way in which you can understand more efficiently, is what I'm trying to get at. Having said that, these principles, these visual principles, they start to apply to a number of different concepts, not just figurative things being like a clock or a pencil or a car. It's not that, okay? You're striving to get at the concept. That this is why I think Kandinsky really nailed it, and people like Wushis Wong really nailed what abstract expressionism was about. It's not just these random shapes. It's you're actually using this to think and to really explore yourself in a super deep way that we're going to get into later. You're going to be able to start seeing things way more clearly. And that's what I think really it's getting at. It's not even about art. It's about correcting probably the most important part of your, or one of the most important parts of your body, which is your eyes, your threat detection system. Really everything that you have to make sense of the world around you, I would say primarily is the eyes before anything else, really before even, let's call it thought. It's not really that, but let's just call it that for the sake of now. When you're really trying to put all your effort into observing reality accurately, and then from that data, create a proper image in your brain, and then from that, you're going to be able to have clearer pictures in your brain than what you have now. Again, I'm going to lay out the full framework for you to be able to take advantage of this. And I want you to send me your work to my email so that we can go back and forth together as to what it is that your drawing is conveying about you and about your problems. And I think you're going to get a ton of value out of this. There's a lot deep into it. And I think that you're going to really be blown away by some of the things that you can learn just by learning to abstract, teaching your mind how you can abstract concepts and make them more complex, and really understand underlying frameworks of reality much deeper than what you're normally accustomed to. Again, here I want to just emphasize how bad normal adult vision is. Why? Because our education system couldn't care less about teaching you things about art, relating to drawing, because it's viewed as, yes, that's artistic, that's nice, but really has no practical application in the world. Only, the most important organ in your body, perceptual organ in your body, that's going to affect how you perceive images into your brain, and then your brain making those images to be able to think better. But that's not important at all, according to our current education system, because as time goes by, we strip more and more things that relate to art, even though it's completely ridiculous. How hard is it, for example, to play the piano, to play the violin? These are things that in school, for example, they're not just going to make you, yes, it sounds nice. No, it's going to develop fine motor skills, concentration skills, imagination, structure, appreciation. And, when you go to become a doctor, even if you're not playing the violin anymore or the piano, you still have fine motor skills. You're able to concentrate. You're able to undersee structures in the body, whatever. It's those skills are transferable, is what I'm getting at. And what we're going to do in this approach that I like to teach is trying to explore more relational concepts, and to see if, even if we're going to be drawing abstractions, and even if we're going to be drawing concepts rather than words, there still needs to be a proper representation between what you think you're seeing and doing and what actually reflects on the paper. And you're going to be stunned about the difference. You think it's one thing, then you put it on paper and it comes out completely different than what you had in your brain. So reality between your brain and the paper starts to completely shift the way that you start to think about what it is that you had in your head. You perceive it from a completely different perspective. You're going to be able to steer away from the object, which is one of the big problems when people are trying to draw. Is, if you want to take a look at this, take a look at, for example, Betty Edwards' book. This is something that I've mentioned in the other video, which is this idea that your brain currently can't perceive away from the object. It's all positive space-based thinking. So in this layout, we can see very clearly what the difference is between working from a concept that can be unfolded into several different realities. For example, we come from a graphic that really represents a hierarchy, a bigger space with a bigger square, a semi-big yellow triangle to represent a medium, and then just trying to make hierarchies of information to represent what might be more important in our visual field. And so you can see that this concept can be taken to a chair. It can be actually taken to very many different kinds of chairs. These structures are also seen in architecture, but it goes deeper. It gives a way for your mind to understand that you can actually play with information in different ways. That are principles that can then unfold onto either a product that you're making, a way of organizing the slides, the materials, the documents that you make, a way of organizing your life, a way of seeing things in a way that's going to help you really open your brain in a variety of ways.